The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the members and associates of the Victoria Zen Centre to you. If you enjoy it, please be sure to let your friends know about Living Zen. If you'd like to support our community, download the Living Zen-podcast app for iPod, iPhone, and Android. One of the most meaningful ways to show your support is by becoming a part of our Sangha as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen podcast and our online e-Zendo will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at zenwest.ca and click on Become an Associate. Many more Zen Talks are available for purchase on iTunes and Amazon.com. Just search for Venerable Eshu Martin. These talks are also available for free on our website to all members and associates of the Victoria Zen Centre. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support. Age appropriateness of meditation. It's a very difficult question to answer because I don't think that it's a pat answer. It's not the same for everybody. Keegan has grown up in a Zen center, so it's kind of been there. As you know, I don't know if anyone was here when we used to have a outdoor Zendo, and Keegan, yeah, you were here, you were there. Doshi was there, and I'm going to embarrass him now. Yeah. Keegan was just very small, and he'd come out buck naked while we were chanting and join and actually put us all to shame, even though he couldn't read and
in the most perfect posture.
Yeah, and wouldn't know the words, and everyone would be like, "Oh, Ava," and he'd be like, "Wah wah," but he didn't know the words, right? So it was great. Did you give him some?
It's out.
Oh, you're out. Basically, I always encourage, when parents are talking about practicing with children, I always really encourage them to be the main practitioner, the parent, right? And then when the child shows interest, you really want to allow that natural curiosity to guide it. So here, when we give instruction, we talk about, and this is sort of I've done a lot of experimentation with this, my favorite lab rat. Here we instruct count 1 to 10. But with young kids, I only do 2, right? Count in 1, out 2, in 1, out 2. And if you lose it, just come back to 1 and start again, right? It's not that difficult. And keep it really short. We often think oh, I need to sit more. But for a young kid, 2 minutes is a really long time. So just letting them sort of really set the tone for how long they want to do. So usually what I recommend is you're sitting, and then if you have another seat beside you, just letting them come in, sit down, and then they go when they're ready to go. And even they can come back and sit down again if they want to, and they can go. And so you sit for 25 minutes, and maybe the kid comes 2, 3, 4 times. Once you don't. And then if the child wants to do more, then just sort of go with it as much as you want. At some point, Keegan was asked, "Oh, can I do the orientation course?" And I was like, "Okay." So he did, So you hated the eating part, yeah. He doesn't like any of the food that we had.
He's mad at me.
Yeah. But generally, I think, so much about meditation practice is about learning how to unify with the activity that you're engaged in. And for most kids, this is actually the opposite problem, right? Kids don't generally have that much trouble unifying with the activity that they're engaged in. So a lot of the time, what I feel is a little bit maybe okay, but trying to get children to meditate too much it's unnecessary. It's unnecessarily burdening them. if anything, I find children are in the plus phase of life where they're really trying to clarify who they are as people. And so any activities that we're doing with kids around Zen practice, I think a lot of them should be more active and more relational. How do I make relationship? How do I know what I'm thinking and feeling about a particular subject? The sort of reflective meditation, I think, comes just a little bit later. So that's totally my opinion. Some people think, get right from the beginning, get them sitting, but I think get them moving first. We'll sit lots later. So yeah, very welcome. Yeah.
It's not really a reasonable question. It's kind of weird. But when you answer the question, why did you come? Why do you never say anything about, because I own the Zen Centre?
Well, because I don't own the Zen Centre. That's one reason.
You're the leader. You're like, I come because unless I'm sick, I kind of have to.
Well, because I don't really ever have to. I mean, I don't think the board is going to, issue. Well, maybe they would, actually. Because it's, I've worked a lot of jobs that were real have-tos, where like going to work, whether I was sick or hungover or, injured with a broken arm from trying to skateboard, had to go because, it was work and I had to do it. And this job, if I can call it a job, this role that I play is the one where it's certainly not a have to. I've had lots of opportunities to, make more money and work less hours and have less responsibility, but this is what I really wanted to do. So that's why I never really talk about that I have to, because I really, doing Zen practice is like a real pleasure for me and joy for me, so that's why I come.
Okay.
You? Yeah? Oh, well, I thought you were pointing at someone. Hey.
Doshu screaming. I had a couple of observations lately that fit in with your teaching. Recently you were giving a talk about the plus and minus activity, birth and death, and you were using the example of a single person who enters a relationship and they all of a sudden the old person dies and there's a new person arises as part of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And they get married and so on, and then a child comes along. That was that talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the couple dissolve and have to manifest as parents or all three together.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I'm in the middle of observing for the third time in my life these family units where a death occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to fit, it's just carrying that exact talk on another step, in that when a person is dying or dies, what was this family unit dissolves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And all those sibling relationships seem to dissolve. And they manifest as, and it's, and they fight over money and stuff, and I'm seeing through that it's not the money, it's this death you're talking about. Like I know, like in one case, there was this person who sued the estate because he didn't get an extra $250,000, and he died 2 years later worth a minimum of $20 million.
Right.
So it's not the money, it's the death of all the siblings in this relationship, with if the parents favoring one or the other, like it just blows apart their sense of self, their picture of self. And I'm just observing that going on, and then I see it in the context of your teaching.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very much true. I mean, this is why I think all deaths are so, whenever somebody that we're in relationship with dies, it's much less their death than the death of how we identify ourselves in relationship with them. That's the difficult, painful part. It's not them that's dying alone. It's actually like our whole world has to change because that component that we've used to identify ourselves in some way or some aspect of ourselves has died. And so now we're back in this position of, who am I? This is a totally foundational koan in Zen, which is, it's phrased many ways like, what was your face before your parents were born? Or who are you without referring to anyone else? This is a very deep question because the way that we identify ourselves is entirely dependent on all of these things around us, the relationships that we have, the environment that we're in, the activities that we do. When we talk to somebody, say, oh, who are you? That's even going around this circle. We say, let's identify, what's your name? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And so we're always talking about these things that we do, these relationships. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a engineer. And any one of those things breaks apart, and we can't say that anymore. We can't say that out to people outside of ourselves, and we can't say that to ourselves anymore. If I completely identify as a husband and father, and my family dies somehow, what am I? It's not just them that's died; it's me also. So I think your point is exactly right, and I think that's the practice that we're engaging in when we're doing Zen practice is really paying attention to that. That happens in bigger ways and in smaller ways in our life. And in fact, it's happening in tiny ways every moment, every transition, every situation when we walk, from the car to the store, into the house. It's like that when we walk into the Zendo, we make this bow. And that's what it's about, is saying, this is an entirely different situation that I've got to relate to entirely differently. And the practice is to carry that sort of attitude and momentum forward into each relationship, into each situation that we have. Oh, completely new situation, completely new me. For me, I really see it in interview when we're doing these intensives that we do. Every day I have 2 interviews with each student a day. And so for a period of an hour, it's sort of like one student after the other coming in. And sometimes the students going through very difficult stuff. Sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're like, wow, this is really great. But they come one after the other. And for me, this is a really important practice that, the first person comes in and they're upset, something's coming up in practice, old, difficult trauma, and I have to totally be there with them. And then the interview's over and they leave, and the next person comes in and they're like overjoyed at what's going on in their practice. And I can't have any residue of the last person who's there. So it's this practice of continuously sort of dropping the last moment and manifesting anew. And if we can learn how to do this and recognize that this is fundamentally the nature of how the cosmos works. Like, it's not just a way of thinking about things, it's actually what's happening. This is a totally different situation. I can't actually do anything about the situation that just ended in this situation. I'm now in this situation. I can really screw this situation up if I'm in that situation or the next situation, but if I can just manifest in this situation, things go much more smoothly. So when you have transitions like that, even just to acknowledge this, even to just acknowledge, like, everybody in the room has just died, and now we have to learn how to relate to each other again in a totally different way. And that requires a profound awareness on the part of every player. But if even one player knows that that's what's going on and can do it, it'll make a significant impact on the whole relationship in those difficult situations. But yeah, what you describe, I think, happens a lot. That when there is a change, we desperately try to grasp for the familiar. And in some ways it can get really hostile. And a great example I can think of, we see kind of, you can see frequently when you start practice. Practice changes you, I think. What comes up through practice really can transform the way that you perceive the world, and as a result, you may have long-standing habits that suddenly your perspective of them changes, and quite suddenly sometimes you just don't really feel motivated to do those things anymore. But if you're in a relationship with a person that really identifies themselves and you by that habit pattern, and you suddenly stop doing it, it's very threatening because that's how that person identifies themselves. And so what happens is that very often you'll see sort of button pushing as a way of identifying, or like trying. You'll have to forgive me if this gets sort of like complex, but it's like you're not doing the things that you normally do that allow me to understand who I am in relationship to you. And so I start doing things that I know you're not going to like because I can rely on the response that you're going to have, which gives me affirmation of who I am. So even if it's a negative thing, right? I call you a name and you say, "Hey, screw you," and I go, normal response, everything's okay. And you're going like, what's the deal? Like, why are you picking a fight with me? But it's just this sort of ego call and response that we get into. And it can be really difficult if things are changing quickly, which they sometimes are in practice, where people are throwing buttons at you and they're not there so much anymore. Usually if it's a partner or a parent, you've got enough that they'll hit one eventually. But just really looking at how investigating this way that we identify ourselves by relying on other things, and really recognizing that can be scary when those things which are transient inevitably dissolve. So, yeah. Yep.
Can you speak to the difference of approaching a situation as if it's new? New may be the wrong word. Not having that residue, but still using experience as a guide, as opposed to not using experience. It's almost, I feel like there's a contradiction in me to approach something in a different, to approach problems using experience, but then being aware of my bad habit patterns, for instance. I'm not making myself clear.
You are. I'm just trying to sort of like sort it out and like, because it's really there. It's really important that it's there. But I find experience. What experience allows you to do is not get on rails so quickly. So in my mind, when you don't have a lot of experience in a situation, like the options, when you're looking at a situation, the possibilities of what's going on are actually fairly limited. You say, okay, I've only had so many experience, like it's only been, when somebody behaves like this, it usually means they're angry at me. And so somebody comes in and they behave like that, and you go, oh, they're angry at me. If you have many experiences with somebody who's behaving like this, the person comes into the room and you're not already sort of headed down that path as soon as they start behaving. You're actually able to say, oh, looking at this situation, there are a number of things that could be happening right now, and I'm not really sure of which one that is, so I don't need to respond right away. I actually need to sort of be present, not make any sort of judgment calls just yet, and just sort of observe until I have more data that I can make a decision based on my experience. Does this make sense?
No, that's yeah.
So, but the being able to be clean about it, or being able to be new, fresh about it, is that when we're not fresh about it, we're already sort of like moving. As soon as something happens, we're already responding based on something that's happened before. or has just happened, or is happening inside of us. And when we can approach things more freshly, there's much more space to sort of say what's going on, like what's really going on here. Yeah. So I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's one that's like I had to sort of like feel it, just like sort of get myself into the situation. So
yeah, the initial description in my mind would almost preclude experience, like but it's not the case.
Yeah, I don't know that you can. I don't know that you can preclude experience. I think, you can't unexperience things. So you're just sort of...
But approaching something fresh every time.
Yeah.
I guess in my mind previous experiences could lead me to react anyway, being able to clear myself of not react, being aware of not reacting to something because of
yeah.
aware that those experiences cause me to react the way I did.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it's really this is going to get really boring, but what I've seen, like in our development, what I see is that generally as we grow up, when a situation arises, we only experiment with response to the point where we get a result that is in the neighborhood of what we're trying for, right? And then the next time that situation comes up, we're really most likely to do the same thing that we did the last time that we got relative satisfaction with. So that by the time we're adults, we sort of have this rut in response to something, and it's almost entirely blank outside of that rut. Like the possibilities of how you could respond to this situation are virtually non-existent. And what happens with practice is it gives you this sort of depth of perception to understand that there are different ways that you could respond to this situation. But even that awareness doesn't lead you to respond differently because there's tremendous fear. As soon as you realize that there's different ways to respond, then you have to start going like, okay, well, what are they? And then you have to be willing to sort of step outside of this deep rut that you've got and respond in different ways. And sometimes they're failures, and sometimes they're successes. Sometimes they're less full successes than the deeply rutted way that we've always done them. Sometimes they're radically more effective. But even so, even when they're radically more effective, we don't always go with that the next time that the situation comes up because we have this deep habit pattern that's just more comfortable. So it takes a lot of practice to be able to try things in different ways. But once we sort of, in more and more areas of our life, once we sort of catch this trick, once we sort of catch that the way that we always do things or the way that we always respond is not the only way of doing things and is not even necessarily the best way of doing things, then when situations arise, we're less quick to make a really definite judgment right away, So this space opens up in our life of there's a situation that arises and the freedom to respond in a variety of ways opens up, and Zen practice becomes about really, I talk about this a lot as a sort of umbrella, like really understanding that our capacity as human beings to respond or to manifest appropriately in the situation is virtually limitless. And once we can sort of understand that and start to experiment with it, start to explore how, this is another koan, how do I manifest in this moment? So the situation arises and the question is, this time, how am I going to respond to this? And this is something that we ask over and over again in all the aspects of our life. And this is how we develop what's called upaya, or skillful means. Responding differently to different situations. And somebody who's really skillful at this is a bit kind of scary to be around, because they're really unpredictable, With one person, does something, and they'll get a very sort of like brusque response from this teacher. And then somebody else does virtually the same thing, and it's like grandma appears and is very kind. And so people say, hey, what's going on? This person's not consistent, or they're not fair. But they have a whole toolbox, and they can use the whole thing in the appropriate situation. So it's a bit scary. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, you got another question?
Well, the second observation is just coming back from session. And it's in retrospect. I could have answered sort of in Zen terms. Somebody on the ferry asked if I played golf. And then I got into this long-winded English explanation. Now, I was good at these sports, but when it came to golf, even though I was good, I couldn't golf because I couldn't shake the ball and stuff. And I could have just said in the other sports, 3 becomes 1. In golf,
I can't dissolve.
I
can't dissolve in golf, yeah.
3 never becomes 1. I mean, that's
so far.
A pretty simple answer.
Yeah.
Be a lot more meaningful.
Well, I just, I don't know. More and more, I just think, even that's just a cop-out, it's just like, realistically, if you really apply yourself and approach it as practice, I think you'd be surprised the results in golf or in whatever it is we think.
Why is hitting the ball into that hole better than hitting it into the trees?
It's all an illusion.
Not.
Yeah.
I noticed the Jukai ceremony you had, it was like a piece of wood. You noticed you handed to Doshu. What was that?
It's just a stick. No, traditionally in Zen, there's a bunch of tools that we can use. There's like one called a hosu, which is like a fly whisk, or fan is another one, or a shippe, which is like the sawed-off end of a bow. But they're just basically a speaking stick. That stick is one that we found on the beach at Saturna Island. We went to the same house we do sesshin. And the reason I really like it is because it's wood, right? Which is we take as being solid. But if you look at it, it's shaped around stones. So it's this thing that's grown and just really moved in order to continue to grow regardless of the limitations that it's met. When we actually found it, it had a rock sort of like melded into the wood. So it's a stick that represents the authority to speak, which is what the Shuso ceremony is really all about. So, thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.